And what I found with prisons was a lot of people in prison were there because they couldn't afford certain choices. So I guess poverty to a great degree put a lot of people in prison, or that disadvantage that they didn't have. And anyone can say they could have made other choices. They could have said no, they could have done this. Yes, they could have. But life's not that simple. It's not as easy as all that. And once you're on a path, it takes a lot of strength and resilience to change that path. So I had a lot of compassion, I guess, for people who made some poor decisions maybe at the end of them up where they were.
Faye and Panic this time C. Today my news you need to have along the way. Today I'm excited to introduce my guest, Bronwyn Boyle, the founder of Archetypes for Life. If you're ready to embrace your authentic self and live with purpose, Bronwyn is the expert to help you there. Join us as we begin this journey. Hello, I'm Faye Waterman, and this is Conversations with Faye, and my guest today is Bronwyn Boyle. And Bronwyn is the founder of Archetypes for Life. We're going to ask Bronwyn who she is and where she comes from first, and then we're going to talk about what archetypes are. Welcome, Bronwyn, and thank you for your time.
No worries. Thanks, Faye.
Bronwyn, you're the founder of Archetypes for Life. What are archetypes? What do you mean? Just tell us a little bit about that, and then I want to ask where you come from and how you got to do that.
Well, an archetype is essentially a pattern of power. So it's those innate parts of you. You know how people get described as they're a comedian, they're an entrepreneur, a teacher, an artist, and they're all archetypes. And so essentially there's like paragraphs in one word, and it's universally understood as those things. So if you describe a bully, if you say the word bully, someone or a situation will come to mind and you know exactly what I'm describing. The template of the bully is the template. The story that you understand the bully personally to you is your story around the bully. But those around you will understand what bully means.
Yes. And there are a lot of those out there in the world these days, or have been for a long time. Yeah. So that's a kind of archetype. So a bully. Name a couple of other archetypes. There's 4 particular archetypes that you really work closely with. What are they?
Think of the 4 legs of the table, if you like, and there are 4 universal archetypes that we all share. Those are the victim, the prostitute, the saboteur, and the child. So we all have that victim in us where we want to blame other people or other people blame us, or we victimize others. And I'm not saying it's intentional even, but people can feel victimized by us. We all have an inner prostitute. And I've tried to get away from the word, but it is what it is. And people understand if you prostitute yourself to a situation or a marriage or a job, people know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's a price you'll pay. And it's that line in the sand when I'll do this, but not that. And you can talk about it, I guess, in terms of money, but it's also your energy. Where do you compromise yourself? Then the saboteur, I think, is probably one of the better understood, as it's been part of language for forever, but it's of contemporary language, where we sabotage ourselves or others. Where do you consistently sabotage yourself? So you're looking for those patterns of, I always falter at the point of empowerment. Does that make sense? Like people get to a point and then they sabotage.
You've got the opportunity to do something, but then the fear steps in and you sabotage yourself. You stop doing it because of that fear or that judgment or whatever it might be. That's sabotaging?
Yeah, so you sabotage yourself. So it's your relationship to power. All of these are relationship to power. And it's how do you empower yourself or others, or disempower yourself or others. And the last one is the child, that inner child, which I think we all can appreciate, that little part in someone where we don't want, in the shadow side, like they're all a sliding scale from the shadow to the light. And in the shadow, we don't want to take responsibility. We're childish. We want our own way. We manipulate to get our own way. And then you've got the childlike. So someone who's childlike can be endearing and wonderful and playful and innocent. So the child in us, you hear people say it's like talking to a 5-year-old, and they're talking to a 45-year-old. And it's like, well, you're kind of talking to the 5-year-old part of that person where they're just not their 45-year-old self. And you can almost sometimes you can see people reduce in age almost. And it's interesting when people go into child, because it's probably, in my experience over the years, it's one of the most powerful archetypes that we have.
And there's a difference between going back into that child than being childish.
Yeah. I mean, they're all neutral. It's neither good nor bad. Like, it's not about judging. I prefer discernment. You can be discerning. When you get into judgment, it's about being better than. It's about being more like that. Judgment sets you apart if you're being judgmental. And discernment is, no, I'm not going to put myself in that situation. You go have at it. Do what you like. That's not for me.
Yeah.
And that's discernment I'm making.
Now, we've talked a little bit about the archetypes, but I want to talk about you now and how you got involved in the archetypes. And when you talk about the archetypes and you're talking with a business person or somebody, they don't necessarily have to be in business to use these archetypes or to be aware of them. What got you involved in it? Where did it start?
Well, I guess I've been doing what I'm doing now for about 18-ish years. I had seen a teacher an author by the name of Myss speak in Perth, and her book Sacred Contracts was just coming out, I think, and she was doing like the archetype tour. And I had a personal situation in my life, and it's like everything got turned upside down in my life at the same time. The big axial moments when the rug's pulled out from underneath you. And so I had a significant personal upheaval. And around that same time, professionally, I was stuck and nothing seemed to work. And everywhere I turned, it was like there was a brick wall. And I felt like I was working in the Department of Justice, and we, kind of affectionately called it the Department of Injustice. It was an interesting time. I worked there for 10 years in various roles, and towards the end, had very challenging roles throughout my career in justice, and those kind of poison chalice jobs. And being part of such a big institution as justice. And I found that archetypes were an incredible tool to have an impersonal look at a highly personal journey. And so I was able to unravel and navigate that period of time a lot easier, I guess. So I could make choices. I could understand them, even though that sounds a bit of a cop-out in some ways. I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I knew I had to do something different. I could see what the template was, and I had tools now to navigate really difficult situations. I basically changed my whole life. I left a social group that I was a part of. I left my job. I sold my house, and that was it. I was done, and completely changed my whole life and started fresh.
You said understand, and I mean, we have to understand who we are in the first place to be able to do anything. You talked about understanding you and what was happening and how you could process what was happening within.
Well, it starts with those four. It starts
Yeah.
with those four. Like, where am I sabotaging myself?
Yeah.
Where am I prostituting myself? I'm staying in a job I'm clearly very unhappy with.
Yeah.
And you can spend a lot of time in a job you don't like making the job wrong. The job wasn't right for me anymore, and I had to make a decision for myself and not feel like the victim or victimize others. I had to do what I could to change the situation for myself and not feel victim of it. So to not sabotage myself anymore and to grow up, basically. I had to grow up and make, you know, adult decisions. Yeah, I was in my 30s when I left justice. Yeah, and I'd been there, so I must have been about 36, maybe 37.
It's a brave move to take that step to leave something that you're not happy with. How many people stay in a situation that they're not happy with? I always say they think that's their lot in life, so that's where they stay. But, you know, people who are in jobs that they don't like tend to create an environment for themselves, but not only themselves, that is uncomfortable for others as well when they stay somewhere. So they're prostituting themselves in a way that not only makes them feel uncomfortable, but others feel uncomfortable. So there's a choice there.
We've got, well, and I don't mean a bad day on earth score. I'm not saying, oh, I'm not happy.
Yeah.
It's at a depth that it's not a pedestrian level unhappy. It's a deep knowing of, if I stay here, it's like a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of death. It's like, this is going, I'm not doing myself or anyone else any favors. And, you know, the prostitute as an archetype, it's not about judging. I'll come back to that discernment, because there are reasons people stay in jobs and they're valid. They've got mortgages to pay. They've got kids. There are things going on in their lives, but it's how do you understand your decision-making processes? How do you understand your patterns so that you can navigate it? You know, I was single. I didn't have kids. Yes, I had a mortgage, but so I could make certain decisions quicker and easier
because you didn't have other responsibilities.
Yeah, it wasn't going to play out so horrifically in other people's lives, because you know, when you've got other people and things to consider, it's not as easy. And doesn't mean my decisions were easy. It would have been a lot safer. I had great jobs throughout my 10 years. I was manager of the parole board. I was manager of operational review for prisons for the state. I had really good job, like impressive sounding jobs.
And responsible jobs. Yeah,
very
positions. Yeah.
Very, and so, but I also knew that this didn't feel like my life path. I liked working with people. And I was a community corrections officer for a while. I liked working with offenders as well.
Why did you like working with the offenders? I always say there's good in everyone. You've just got to find it, or they've got to find it so that they can change.
I mean, to this day, I challenge anyone who says I could never go to prison. There's a lot of people in prison. I'm not saying about deserving of anything. It's not about that. It's that any one of us, a decision can go badly or something out of our control, and we can still flirt with the justice system to varying degrees. And what I found with prisons was a lot of people in prison were there because they couldn't afford certain choices. So I guess poverty to a great degree put a lot of people in prison, or that disadvantage that they didn't have. And anyone can say they could have made other choices. They could have said no. They could have done this. Yes, they could have. But life's not that simple. It's not as easy as all that. And once you're on a path, it takes a lot of strength and resilience to change that path. So I had a lot of compassion, I guess, for people who made some poor decisions, maybe, and that ended them up where they were.
Sometimes that wouldn't have been their choice, the decision. They may have made that decision with others surrounding them that would have been affected as well. But it's also interesting because those people that are, I call them repeat offenders, and they go in and out of prison all the time. But their security, a lot of the time, is in the prison system because they've got a roof over their head. They've got people there, whereas if they're out on the street, they're on their own and they have to survive, find food, find shelter, all those sorts of things.
I saw it all the time. Yeah. And that's survival is where those 4 archetypes reside. They are the survival archetypes. They're the fundamental archetypes of our lives. Build to the next, one smack to the next. And I don't know, I just found that people wanting to make some change in their lives, and even the smallest things, requires a lot. And they do some wonderful programs in prisons, and then they go back to the environment they came from. And to have the stamina, the self-worth, the stamina, and the belief of that things will change, it's really hard. I'm not saying I'm too soft or anything, but I can see how things come about. You can see the story, because I also spent a few years sitting in court.
That would have been interesting. But I want to say,
never dull.
No. That you talk about these people that come out of an environment for a period of time, but then they go back into the same environment. And I always say nothing changes if nothing changes. And they've got to be strong enough and have those archetypes and the stamina to be able to make the changes and move from where they are into some other environment. And I taught people 5th generation long-term unemployed. They come out, they go into the classroom, and they go back into their environment. So nothing changes if nothing changes.
Well, 5th generation of people where they were the first in their family to go to university, the first in their family to... But if you've grown up and you've never, ever seen someone in your household get up, have a shower, get dressed, make some lunch and go to work, you've never had that modeled to you. So to have a deep unrest in yourself, living life in survival mode, which is essentially what we're describing, it's just surviving. And then having something that there's a resentment that grows where you haven't had that opportunity. Others may say you haven't created that opportunity for yourself. Whatever the words around it, the opportunity hasn't been realised.
But they haven't seen it either, have they?
Well, when you're in survival mode, that's what I mean about not being able to be creative. It feels like choices are being made for you. You're not making choices. It looks like you're making choices, and yes, you are. That's where the victim can step in, and it's like you can feel like you don't have choices. When there's something in you that wants to come out, whether it's the teacher, the artist, the mother, there's so many different archetypes, and it's figuring out what in the card deck of life, what's my strong suit? I think if you can find, even if it's a couple of archetypal patterns in yourself and animate them so they have some power, that's where you really start to see the change. Because a visionary who's living in survival mode might have a vision, like a big vision for what could be. But it's really hard to create that when you're just slogging it out day to day. You have to have insight and bigger sight and a bigger view, a wider vista, if you like, to then even think about how do I create that. If you don't have the spare $100, I remember sitting in court and there were people that stayed on remand because they didn't have $500 to put up for bail or anyone who would do it for them. So none of it's simple, none of it's easy. And if you can animate something in yourself that has that flaming butane possibility of power in it, then you can incrementally make way. You can make a path for that.
It's interesting because I'm sort of thinking about those people that are in those situations where they don't have anyone who inspires them because they're just doing the day-to-day stuff for survival. If they don't get someone who has some form of insight into the possibility of what they could be and drag them out of that situation, they usually stay there, don't they?
You can have the trappings of life and still feel stuck.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it doesn't discriminate, if you like. 10 years in justice for me was a 10-year study of extreme outcomes from decisions. There's an extremeness about it and a finality in a lot of ways. Whereas you go up the food chain a little, if you like, as people would say. It looks like life's easier, and in some ways it is, but you are not immune. Money doesn't make you immune to all of that stuff as well. It looks different, but the template's the same. It just looks different, and you can afford different choices. Well, I had this analogy of the wall of cereal. When I was a kid, you had Wheaties, cornflakes, oatmeal, muesli was posh.
Very posh.
There was, Fruit Loops were a treat, right? Now, you go into a supermarket and there is a wall of, 300 plus, I just made that number up, but there's hundreds of choices of cereal. You either stick to your staple, that's what I have, or you have enough money in your pocket that you go, I'm going to experiment a bit around, and you can play a bit around. And when you think about the wallet in terms of our choices, when you've got a bit of spare cash, you can afford to make all kinds of different choices. And some of that sabotage comes in when you avoid the choices you feel or know you need to make, but you can afford to avoid them for a period of time. And eventually, and I see this in business often, while you can afford to put Band-Aids on a problem or to, I can't afford to lose that staff member because but that staff member is causing all kinds of issues in your workplace. Yeah. And, sometimes you got to prune the bush back for it to flourish. It's in the language, and it's in energetically, it's in the decisions around the decisions you think you can afford to make and what you can't afford to make. And eventually, if the literal bank account starts to run out, you don't have choices. Your choices get reduced and reduced and reduced until you've only got one choice left.
And you have to make that decision, and it's usually a tough decision, but when you've made it, you think you should have done it earlier.
Well, the decision often gets made for you. I've seen a few people of late go into administration, and going bankrupt is not
a good thing.
I enjoy doing. And it's not about the blame game. It's how do I understand myself better and read the landscape around me better to make more informed choices at the right point in time.
I'm looking forward to our next conversation that we're going to have, because it's going to be an extension of what we've talked about here today, Bronwyn. And I hope that the viewers have got many things actually, from this conversation. Let's pause it there, and we'll be back again with another conversation to talk further about what the archetypes are and how they work, and the values. We'll delve into those values even more, and learn about who we are and allow ourselves to embrace us as our true selves and let it shine out into the big wide world. We'll be back again with Bronwyn with another conversation. Bye for now. subscribe button on our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Instagram. Stay inspired, stay connected, and join our amazing community today.